in this country over the last week, certainly in light of comments made by TV personality Sonia Kruger, articles written by Andrew Bolt, Pauline Hanson's political ascension and appearance on the Q&A TV program. It's becoming clear there is a body of people out there that simply have lost faith in the mainstream political parties to protect them and to enact the appropriate legislation when it comes to this real threat, and are looking for alternatives in the case of One Nation anyway, which not that long ago was seen probably by even a number of these voters as sort of a little bit beyond the pale. Well, Douglas Murray, of course, writing from a European perspective, speaks about France, Germany and other societies there going through exactly the same motions. This is, I think, a global story unfolding. Douglas Murray, of course, contributor with The Spectator and Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society, has been good enough to join us this morning on the show. Once again, Douglas, lovely to have your company.
Very good to be back with you.
This is, as I said, I think it's a global phenomenon, particularly in the West. I mean, we're seeing the rise of Trump, obviously, in the US, but Marine Le Pen, Brexit in the UK, the AFD, rather, in Germany. We've had, as you might be familiar with, a week here dominated by stories about Muslim migration and the issue of Islamism. And the narrative seems to be the established political order. The public, a lot of the public have lost faith in that established order, the main parties and their players, to protect them from the threat.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think it's slightly worse than that, which is that on any analysis of the situation in all of the developed democracies that we're talking about, the publics are, I think, rightfully getting concerned and are, as it were, to simplify things, are moving to the right. But the thing that is so difficult about this is that simultaneously the politicians are all stampeding to the left. In other words, the more that the public are aware of the problem, the more the politicians of the mainstream seem to think their job is to sort of dampen down the problem or pretend it away, or not even, as we know from America, using the correct terms to describe the problem. All of these things massively inflame the public feeling that our politicians are not up to this task. And the problem with that is that in some countries there certainly are political parties who feel that they are up to the task and don't have any problem with identifying the problem, but are themselves, to varying degrees, unsavoury places and parties to put your political trust in.
I suppose the answer, though, the medicine, as it were, to stop the unsavoury becoming the elected is for the established order, most probably on the conservative side of politics, the Tories in the UK, the Christian Democrats in Germany, the Coalition Party in Australia, etc., the Republicans in America, to address the issues of their base and to prove to their base that they don't need to go and shop their vote around to the highest bidder, as it were, or what have you, but in fact that they can and will enact a policy to address their concerns.
Well, I couldn't agree more, but I mean, it's worth not writing off the left on this, because left-wing politicians also have an extraordinarily significant role at this point. I mean, in France, it is left-wing politicians like Prime Minister Manuel Valls who are trying to start to step into this gap. And they really do have to. In the UK, you mentioned Brexit, and these things are sort of all tangentially perhaps connected, but it was left-wing Labour voters who tipped the vote over for Brexit, and that's something that left-wing politicians have to think about as well. You know, it's not a right-wing thing to be worried about immigration. It's not a right-wing thing to be worried about mass immigration. It's not a right-wing thing to be worried about terrorism. It's a normal thing. And that's something that people of right and left are concerned about, and that politicians of right and left mustn't give up on.
What about the issue of free speech? In Australia, we had a television host recently. At one point, she's hosted our version of Dancing with the Stars. She's just on a morning sort of television program now. When asked by a different co-host about the issue of Islam and migration, she said, "Oh, look, well, yes, I think maybe we should look at limiting Islamic or stopping Islamic migration in the short term," or words to that effect. The reaction that she copped was quite intense And a lot of people simply saying, oh, well, you shouldn't be saying that, B, you shouldn't be allowed to say that, she should be sacked, blah, 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 blah. I mean, in all of this discussion in and of itself isn't a Douglas part of the story, because political correctness and all the crimps and whatever that come with that are stopping a free and frank dialogue here.
Absolutely, and you see, that's why the case you're talking about is why it attracts so much ire. And it's the same every single country. We've all had now at least one, usually multiple cases of this. Sometimes it's a television star, sometimes it's a politician, and it's people saying what you're not meant to be allowed to say. I have to say, by the way, as a non-Australian, but always watching events in your country with interest, Australia has become one of the most anti-free speech societies, I would argue, in the developed world. You seem so intent on patrolling language, and I would say that in Australia, one of the interesting things, everyone who does this always falls for this problem of pretending that words and actions are the same thing. So they say, and I've heard this on Australian television, if you say this, people will get hurt. You think, why? These are words. The best way to avoid anyone being hurt is to use words. But they make words and actions basically the same thing. And they don't realize how dangerous that is, because it makes everybody shut up. And I think that those people who've been trying to stop us all talking, trying to stop the public saying, it may be a majority feeling or a majority opinion, but it's racist, bigoted, shut up, are actually a massive part of this problem. Because if you look at every society, as I say, in the developed world at the moment that's worried about these things, the thought police and the clampdown on free speech people have been having their way for quite a long time. But the fascinating thing is that poll after poll shows that the public don't buy it. So if you stand up and say what the person you just cited says, you will be flamed, as they say, on social media. Twitter and Facebook will come for you. You'll be made to feel like a complete pariah, but you'll also be saying what most people think. A poll 2 years ago in France, before the Charlie Hebdo attacks even, showed that more than 70% of the French public, more than 70%, think that Islam itself as a religion is incompatible with French society. Incompatible. Not just has some problems, incompatible. And yet, in France, like everywhere else, anybody who says this thing that seems to be thought by more than 70% of the public is weirdly, by this 2 or 3% of the chatterati, shut down, called an extremist, called a bigot, and the result is that we don't have the conversation we should have been having for years now.
With that in mind, I'm speaking with Douglas Murray. Douglas, with that in mind, of course, politics is largely, unless you sort of fight it like Erdogan and you want to be a dictator, politics is largely the contest of who can get the most votes. It's a contest of who can be the most popular. If indeed these polls are accurate, why is it then that the political establishment don't, through their policies, reflect the will of the people?
That's a very interesting question. There are various reasons, I think. One of them is that they are aware that there is a very large political cost to them if they admit to the scale of this problem. You see, a politician in France has to be very careful because, on the one hand, if they start to really identify this problem and try to do something about it, the public will say, well, we knew this for years. Why are you only just coming on board? And also, you're responsible for this. It was your policies that allowed this to go on and ferment. So that's one thing. But another thing is that the politicians are very wary because, they know that if they just dip a toe into this, everything changes. They will be accused of absolutely everything by that tiny percentage of people I was talking about earlier. And it could finish them. It could do for them. They could become identified by all the media and so on as the bigot, the racist, and worse. And these people don't want to risk that political price. We have, after all, in all of our countries, a political language based on uttering bromides. I'm for, young people and excited about the future and equality and all of this sort of stuff. But this is a really difficult issue because we all know that we're not talking about everybody from the religion of Islam by any means.
Correct.
And we're not talking about anyone, in these sort of sweeping terms. But we know that within these communities there is a problem. And actually, we're a very long way away from even starting to deal with it because we don't even want to dip that toe in because of the political cost of doing so. I simply think at some point that's going to change. We're only ever one major attack away from everything changing.
And of course, ultimately, and to conclude on this point, Douglas, I suppose ultimately what a lot of the politicians seem to fear the most is being accused and branded with the greatest crime these days, and that is being accused of being a populist. Yes, it's very strange, this populist thing. I mean, the word populist is now used to describe any politician who's popular. Anyone who's got support. People. It's a very strange thing. I mean, I thought that, I could understand people should be wary of demagoguery, of course. Yeah.